People asked me in El Paso, do you think Trump is responsible for what happened? And I said, well, look, I mean, obviously he didn't pull the trigger, but he's certainly been tweeting out the ammunition.
If you want action now, we got to send a message to Mitch McConnell. We can't wait until one of us gets in the White House. We have to pass those bills right now.
The mass shootings are terrible, but they get all the headlines. Children die every day on streets, in neighborhoods, on playgrounds.
Year after year, I had an F rating from the NRA.
So background checks and gun licensing, these are agreed to by overwhelmingly the majority of Americans. I was the first person to come out for gun licensing.
As you saw from those clips and earlier ones we showed you in the show, gun control was one of the most talked about topics in last night's debate. And obviously it's an issue that is gaining a lot of traction in the wake of yet another surge in gun violence in this country. In fact, executives from 145 large corporations, they just sent a letter to the Senate demanding action. Levi Strauss, Uber, Twitter, Bloomberg, just a few of the very big names that have signed on. They want the Senate to pass background check bills that have already gotten through the House. And they also support red flag laws. They would enable courts to keep guns out of the hands of people who are already deemed mentally unfit. I want to read a portion of the letter for you. Quote, every day, 100 Americans are shot and killed and hundreds more are wounded. Gun violence in America is not inevitable, it's preventable. Doing nothing about America's gun violence crisis is simply unacceptable, and it is time to stand with the American public on gun safety. Now, back in D.C., Congress, they've been back in session all 1 week here, but there has been little, if any, progress when it comes to this issue. But at least people are talking about trying to do something. It almost constitutes as progress nowadays. Chris Murphy of Connecticut and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, both Democrats, moderate Democrats, and Republican Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, they spoke with the president this Wednesday. They are trying to pin him down to get him to support expanded background checks. Latest polls show it shouldn't be too tough. More than 90% of Americans support the initiative, so it would seem like a no-brainer. But again, so far, nothing has happened. Nancy Pelosi, she's not too happy about it. She got testy with reporters when they asked her what the House is going to do to deal with gun violence.
Lives are at stake. Senator McConnell is standing in the way. We passed our bill in February. Members had events all over the country to ask him to bring up the bill. Don't ask me what we haven't done. We have done it. And if you are annoyed with my impatience, it's because people are dying, because Senator McConnell hasn't acted. Why don't you go ask him if he has any regrets for all the people who died because he hasn't acted?
Well, my next guest, Ladd Everitt, is a longtime gun control advocate. He's also former director of One Pulse for America, a gun violence prevention group formed after the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando that killed 49 people in 2016. Ladd, thank you for the time.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we played not only those clips, but also early in the program, what Beto O'Rourke had to say on the stage, more specifically about assault weapons, and said, yeah, he's coming for the AK-47s, he's coming for the AR-15s. There has been apparently some real concern among Democrats that he went too far with that. I want to read what Chris Coons, a Democratic senator from Delaware, had to say about it. Quote, I frankly think that the clip's going to be played for years at Second Amendment rallies with organizations to try to scare people by saying that Democrats are coming for your guns. Is Senator Coons right to be nervous, or when you heard what O'Rourke said, did you say finally somebody said it out loud?
I think I said finally somebody said it out loud. You know, I think both Democrats and Republicans are trying to gauge where the public stands on the issue. I would submit that where Chris Coons is right now might be significantly behind where the gun control grassroots is. You know, the gun control grassroots is perfectly fine with tougher policies that you've referred to, like the assault weapons ban, like national gun licensing and registration, which Cory Booker mentioned in the debates. These policies are all broadly popular among people in the gun control grassroots. Both people who are very active volunteers and then people who might be donors or less involved. So, you know, I think the Democratic candidates kind of reflect largely where the grassroots is, where the public is on the issue. I'm not very confident that congressional Democrats are reflecting that. And I think you played a great clip of Nancy Pelosi reacting angrily to the challenge of what she's done on gun control. I think we need to face it too that her regime in the House hasn't been a great one on gun control. And even the two bills that her House passed were both tainted with these motion to recommit amendments. The one on the background checks bill, H.R. 8, is very significant. It would it would force the FBI to notify ICE whenever an undocumented immigrant tries to buy a gun, which is a very controversial provision in Democratic and progressive circles. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around, and I think you're still seeing establishment Democrats in Congress kind of feel out where the public is right now on this issue.
I mentioned, by way of introduction, your unfortunate introduction in this issue after the tragedy at the Pulse nightclub. And from we're not that far from Sandy Hook. And I remember being wrong yet again, but firmly sure after that tragedy, those 20 first graders and those teachers that died, that would be the catalytic to get things going in real ways. But there was a debate that came after that, and a lot of finger pointing about why didn't anything get done. But I saw some people who told me privately and publicly, but said, listen, to get this done, you got to go incremental. And to have some big 4-point package, even though the majority of the public supported it, that wasn't going to go anywhere. They were proven right. What did you learn in the aftermath of the tragedy in Orlando and other of these shootings that to move Washington and to move the public, do you have to do it incrementally, or do you say, I'm going to have one window of time, I'm going to try and get as progressive and as big a package through, because I know that generally the American public's more with me than against me?
I think the latter, clearly. I mean, look, if incrementalism was a recipe for success for the gun control movement, the last 25 or 40 years even would have been a time of great achievements for us, because we've been incremental and kind of very meek and apologetic in our advocacy that whole time. I think clearly that whichever side has the most intensity wins on this issue. And I think, for many decades, you've seen the gun lobby side, the pro-gun side, being way more intense than gun control advocates ever were. Look, I mean, if somebody has a case to make that incrementalism over the last past 4 decades has beat the NRA, has beat pro-gun advocates, I'd love to see you try to make that case. In my mind, it's been a total failure, and what's going to really put us over the top is the gun control movement finally embracing our own HR 1, if you will, our own Green New Deal, our own project or program of great ideas that aren't going to fiddle around with a problem of epidemic proportions, but solve it. And we can do that. It's within our power to.
Through so many things in this country, it almost takes a generational push. Have you guys found in your organization that when you look generationally, where does the 30 and under crowd in this country feel about this issue? Because they grew up with it, where prior generations didn't have to worry about doing drills in schools, etc. Is there an inevitability, you think, with this, Ladd, where, like we said, in the generation Y or Z, because they lived through this thing, that it's when, not if, the change happens, even if the spine isn't there in this year's Congress?
That's exactly right. I think you summed it up perfectly. I think the younger generation is ahead of us. You can see that where March for Our Lives is right now, where they're going to be advocating over the next 5 years, let's say. And I think the choice for our generation, Richard, is we all have to make a choice whether we want to be able to tell our grandkids one day that we were part of this change and that we joined these young people, we supported them, we advocated for real reforms to stop violent people from buying guns, or if we want to do this incrementalism thing and fight for a half loaf of bread with Joe Manchin and Pat Toomey and end up getting nothing.
I take it you think that even more than maybe a lot of the public and maybe even some of the pundits think, this is going to be a big election issue, not just presidentially here, but even on the congressional Senate races as well.
I think absolutely. It was a big issue in the 2018 midterms. And look, I would argue that the only reason that Mitch McConnell has even verbally indicated that the Senate might consider gun control bills is because he's feeling intense political pressure, and because McConnell feels that maybe his political future depends on doing something on gun control. So I think a great reckoning is coming. And, I think there's a lot of debate to be had about obstacles in the 2020 election, how fair and free those elections will be. But I'm very confident that people going to the polls, and this would certainly include, for example, Republican women from suburban areas who are terrified about sending their kids to school every day, I think there's going to be a real strong push for gun control at the polls.
Ladd, great job. I always appreciate talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we are going to stay on the conversation of guns. And usually, like we just did there, it's surrounded by politics, obviously. But on the other side of the break, we're going to take a look at the issue from a different angle. A doctor. He'll tell us how devastating assault weapons are to the human body. He knows, as he's seen the damage up close and personal.